Good evening, and I'm glad you're here. We're going to talk about the topic, Blessed are the poor in spirit. And we're going to talk about how that relates to pride, humbleness, and human intelligence. As always, our lesson is based on the Gospel according to Spiritism as codified by Allan Kardec. And we'll be studying, this content is from chapter 7 in the Gospel, and tonight we're looking at items 11, 12, and 13. And I would encourage you to use this as part of your home study when you read the Gospel at home. Chapter 7, items 11, 12, and 13. Very interesting. And we're going to talk about some of the Spirit teachings tonight. So, what we want to learn is to clarify the meaning of pride and the meaning of humbleness and show their consequences and what we can do to eliminate one and develop the other. Of course, we want to eliminate pride and develop humbleness. We also want to learn about the vices. Oh, I guess I could advance this so y'all could see it. Oh, there we go. Okay, we want to learn about the vices that are caused by pride and how to correct those and how to combat our pride. And we want to identify the mission of the intelligent person on earth and the need to use intelligence properly. That may sound like it doesn't relate to pride and humbleness, but we'll see once we get to that part of the lesson how it does relate. So those are our objectives for our lesson tonight. And I want to read to you a little bit. I'm going to read to you a little bit from the Gospel tonight because I think it's important. And the first thing I'd like to read is at the very beginning of chapter 7, Blessed are the poor in spirit. And the scripture is from Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. And it's very simple and straightforward and short. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now, what does the gospel mean when it says the poor in spirit? Does it mean we are intellectually limited? Does it mean our spirits are low or poor? That's not what it means. When we say poor in spirit, that means that we have humbleness, that we are like we're very humble and we have humility and not pride. So that's what Jesus meant when he said poor in spirit. So that is from the book of Matthew. And we're going to talk first about eliminating pride and developing humility or humbleness. So how first can we define humbleness? What is it? What makes us humble? Well, humbleness is the virtue. Well, it didn't go. It's the virtue that levels all men and makes us all equals. If we do not put ourselves above others, then we begin to see that we are all equals in God's eyes and in our own eyes. We're all on a level playing field. We are all here on earth to study and learn and become better spirits. And the lesson taken from the the Gospel according to Spiritism, the systematized study guide. That's where the questions will come from tonight, and all of our quotations. Humbleness is a virtue that may very well have been forgotten among us. Well, we know it's not forgotten by everyone, but when we look around ourselves, the society that we live in, sometimes we don't always see that humbleness in others, and we don't have it within ourselves either. And this is something that we need to work on. So, is it possible to be humble while at the same time being proud? Can we be humble and proud at the same time? Jesus says no. Humbleness lifts us morally, enabling us to progress more rapidly, while pride is a major obstacle on our road toward progress. So the more prideful we are, the more we place ourselves above others or put too much value on material things, then the harder our road of progress is going to be and the longer it will be. So that's why we want to emphasize the spiritual and the humility, the humbleness, rather than our pride. So we can't be humble and proud at the same time. Pride is a terrible enemy of humbleness. So they're at opposite ends. The more pride we have, the less humility we're going to have. And we want to slide that scale on over this way so that we can be more humble and less prideful. So can we be charitable to others without being humble? Again, Jesus says, no, this is not possible, because this feeling of humility tells us that we are all brothers and sisters and that we should help each other. Doing so will lead us to the road of God and will put us closer to God by considering all of our brothers and sisters as equals and treating them as we would like to be treated. That's part of humbleness. Without humbleness, we cover ourselves up with virtues we do not have. It is as if we wear a disguising cover to hide the imperfections of our souls. And in the gospel, in this particular spirit teaching, we have a message from Angelo, the spirit Angelo, who is a good and beneficent spirit. And he wants us to know that humbleness of heart is a virtue you too often neglect. While many examples have been placed before you, few have ever been followed. You can love your neighbor. You can love your neighbor when you neglect this virtue. Yet, can you love your neighbor when you neglect this virtue? Can you truly love your neighbor if you do not have humbleness? Not really, he says. With humbleness of heart, you see everyone as equals. It makes you realize that you are all brothers and sisters who should help each other. And in this way, it prepares you to live more compassionately. Without humbleness of heart, you might present a good outward show of virtue, but in fact, you are simply assuming qualities you don't really have, as if you were dressing up in fancy clothes to hide a bad bruise. For inspiration, remember the sublime teacher. Remember the meekness of heart, which was so genuine that it made him the greatest among all prophets. And who is he speaking of there? The greatest of all prophets, the great teacher? Jesus, of course. And Jesus would be the prime example of humbleness and gentleness and meekness that we need to follow. But our guardian spirit here says that too many of us do not follow that path, and that it can make our lives harder, especially if we have to repay debts in our next incarnation. All right, so is it possible to see humbleness among the wealthy? Can rich people be humble, or are they all what you might call superior to others? Well, of course they can be humble. Wealth in itself is not evil. It becomes good or bad according to the way we use it. The important thing is that we don't encourage pride nor cause obstacles to moral development. In other words, don't spend all our time, if we are rich, make sure we're helping others. Make sure we're studying ourselves and studying the gospel, studying Jesus' teachings. Set aside time to be humble and to learn about the teachings of Jesus and to feed your spiritual self, your soul, and not just your material needs. So what are the consequences of pride? What will happen to us if we're too prideful? Well, pride causes disorder in our social life, rivalry between classes and peoples, intrigues, hatreds, wars, etc., all the kinds of bad stuff. And as you can see from that list there, it can be something very small, like we are envious of our neighbor, so we have to have something better than they have, all the way up to our world leaders, that if they do not show humbleness and kindness toward their people and the peoples of other countries, then this can result in war, which is one of the worst things that we can imagine that could arise from pride. It is the imperfection that is blocking the progress of the Spirit and leads us to assume debts, which will make our trials harder and our expiations more painful, as the Spirit was mentioning. It will make our trials harder. It will cause us to incur debts that we may need to atone for in our next incarnation. And we do not want to make more debts for ourselves while we're here on earth. We want to atone and make up for our faults while we are here and not put it off till our next incarnation. We want to work on it now while we are incarnated here on the earth. That's what we're here for. Wealth leads us to temptation and fascination. It can lead us that direction. But when guided by humbleness and adjusted with discretion and moderation, it becomes a source of great good. A wealthy person who is humble and who is willing to share his or her wealth with the people around them, that is an expression of their humbleness. And people who are rich, as we learned a minute ago, they can also be humble. If you're rich, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are feeling superior to everyone else. It's within you. It's how you use your wealth that will determine this. So why then does pride exist? Where does it come from? Why is it here with us on earth? Pride exists as a result of ignorance of the real values of life, which leads us to think selfishly in our personal development and to spurn our brothers and sisters or to cast them aside as if we didn't care about them. And what is the golden rule? Love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. And if we are ignorant of this, if we don't understand what it means, then we have a long way to go in developing humbleness. We have too much pride. So being kind to our neighbor is one of the first things that we should do in order to give ourselves merit in the eyes of God. Pride has covered our world with blood and ruins, and yet that is what causes us suffering that originates beyond the grave in the spirit world. Now, I'm not sure that I understand this very well, especially that part about how it originates beyond the grave in the spirit world. What does that mean exactly?
It's the suffering that the spirit experiences when he is on the spiritual world.
Which results from
Suffering that originates beyond the grave in the spiritual world. He's like he had a chance to redeem himself by being here, but he didn't. So when he
I see.
That's why he goes back to the spiritual world. He continues being who he was.
Right, we don't change just because we go to the spiritual world. We only change by reincarnation.
But over there it's getting worse now. So all these actions that he used to do in here continues over there. It's worse.
I see.
It originates beyond the grave in the spiritual world.
Okay, that makes sense. And as that happens, that's going to go into our reincarnatory plan. We're going to have to work on that in our next incarnation. So we don't want to, as I said, we don't want to make our lives harder, and we certainly don't want to make our lives unpleasant when we go to the spiritual realm. That is where we become our true selves, and we don't change our stripes just because we have gone to the spirit world. We are still the same person, as Eduardo said. Change comes from within us by practicing the divine laws and the teachings of Jesus. So I thought that was an interesting quotation. Of all the evils, pride is the most awful because it leaves in its path the seed of almost all vices. Our intelligence, without the moral support of the gospel, generates feelings of superiority over others, leading us to insubordination to God. And there again, that's a thing of not being able to obey the divine laws that God has set forth. And we can't progress spiritually unless we begin to understand those divine laws and follow them and practice Jesus' teachings in our daily lives. So, and they always say pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. We've all heard that. So we know it's a pretty big thing. And it's a big thing to overcome for some people. And we overcome it by developing our humble and gentle side. So let's talk about some of those vices and passions that arise from pride, that can spring up from pride. So first of all, how can we combat pride? What do we do if we feel too proud and we want more material things and we know that we're not being kind to our neighbors? How do we work against that? Well, we can combat pride by humbly studying the gospel of Jesus and seeking to live the teachings therein. Notice it says we should seek to live those teachings. In other words, to incorporate them into our daily lives while we're here on earth. Not just to read them and understand them, but to actually use them in our real life. Humbleness is the antidote to pride. I like that quotation. It makes me think of, when you get a snake bite. It's very painful and it puts venom into your system and you could die. And the antidote, you have to go to the hospital to get the antidote. And that kills the poison and you're better. And that's kind of what pride is. It makes us, it's like a poison within us. And if we allow it to continue to grow by not practicing humbleness, then it will overtake us. And we'll get to a point where we become desperate, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So, what are the vices caused by pride? Well, as we would suspect, they're passions for material things, envy, jealousy, selfishness, etc. All those things that are the opposite of the virtues that we should employ, like kindness and justice and humility, humbleness. So those are the things that can arise from pride. When the vices of pride settle in the hearts of man, life becomes a constant torment. And we were just discussing that a minute ago, how if pride poisons your spirit, then it gets harder and harder for you, not easier. We can surround ourselves with all kinds of material things. For example, suppose that we have our neighbor, and we live in a wealthy neighborhood, and our neighbor is rich. Well, that neighbor gets a better speedboat than ours. And we think, well, I've got to keep up here. I don't want him to have a better speedboat than I do, so I'm going to go out and buy myself the next bigger one or the next best one. And can you see how that can just keep rolling on? And it becomes a torment for you because you're always trying to best your neighbor. You're always trying to be superior and better. And that can be a huge burden on a person. So that's another thing, that's another reason why we want to avoid pride, because it can, if it goes to the extreme, then it can be actually a torment toward our souls. So what happens when pride goes to the extreme? This would be an indication of a dramatic decline, because God always provides correction for the proud. Notice that the gospel doesn't tell us that God provides punishment. Our God is a loving God, and Our God wants us to do, He wants us to do well. He's on our side. So, however, He wants us to be good spiritually. So He gives us these opportunities that will allow us to do that if we choose to accept them. Because He always will provide correction for us, meaning that He will put an opportunity in our way that may be very difficult for us. And if we can get through that and learn from it, of course we'll be a better person spiritually. The greater the rise of pride, the more terrible is its fall. And that goes back to what we were just discussing about the extremity. If you go to the extreme, the higher they are, the further it is to fall. So we have to be careful not to let ourselves get to that point where it's going to be a fall for us, and a very terrible one. So we always talk about how the earth is a planet of trials and expiations, but we do know that the earth is also going to become a planet of regeneration one day. So our next question wants to know if pride will still exist as an evil in society, or will it one day disappear? So here is what our gospel says. Yes, it will one day cease to be an evil in society for those who do not attend to the fraternal appeals of the gospel. Divine justice reserves painful processes of correction by the proper reincarnation. And here again, this alludes to the spirit realm and how we are prepared for our next incarnation, our reincarnatory plan. And we can be sure that that plan will include things that may be very difficult for us if we have not followed God's laws up to this point. So it is very important that we develop humbleness for that reason. God never fails to castigate the proud. If He sometimes allows them to climb, it is to give them time for reflection and atonement. I don't know about that either. Does that mean to y'all that if God allows us to reincarnate as a wealthy person, that He gives us that as an opportunity to treat our wealth as we should have, or as we should have in a previous life? Is that what that means?
Yeah, it also can be that. And it can also be the fact that he makes some business deal or something, and God's giving him opportunity to make more money and give another chance to him and to see if he's going to use in the proper way.
That makes sense.
Probably, like you mentioned before, it's nothing wrong with having money and having good things in life. The problem is what we do with that when we have it. That's the problem, the pride. So he keeps using that for his own benefit. So God will keep giving a chance until the moment they say that's enough.
Just to give you an example, it's like two people, one never smoked. So to smoke is not a vicious. The other one smoked all life long. They smoke is a challenge. And the smoking is a challenge for this person. He knows it's not good for him. It's a challenge for this person to stop. So that's the idea. You keep struggling to get rid of that. So not smoking is something good. But the challenge here in our road is for those who smokes and have to stop.
Exactly.
That goes the idea. When you have that to come with that to challenge you, and it's not easy. But we always are always the weight God gives us is the weight we can carry.
That's right.
Always can carry.
God will never burden us more than we can carry. So it is within our capacity to be humble and to do the right things. We just have to realize it.
Gabriela said about free will.
The free will, yeah.
It's good to remember that pride doesn't come just with money. Pride comes with power.
That's true.
And the only way to know that you are free from pride is having the challenge that's going to bring this pride inside of you. So God is always going to give us opportunity to test us and see if we really learn the lesson.
That's why it says He may allow us to climb,
Exactly.
so that we can show that we've learned the lesson.
This specific title is talking about the reach the money thing, but what it actually works at, it's the earth pleasures that we have, that we like to enjoy, all of them.
Right.
Material and earthly pleasures.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your input on that. So what do we do to gain favor with God? What should we do? Well, it's very simple. We must be charitable and humble toward others. There it is again, the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And it sounds so simple, right? But we know that it's not always easy. As he said, it's not easy. God wouldn't put it to us as a challenge if it were going to be easy for us. So it's good that it's something that we can work on, and we may not get it right away, but if we keep working, then one day we will. So we must be charitable toward our neighbors. The humblest among us today will be the greatest.